It's pretty well known that Final Fantasy XV had a lot of issues throughout its development cycle, and looking at the finished product, it's clear the game suffered from this. We know that Final Fantasy XVI has been in development for many years already. We've recently had confirmation that 16 will be delayed by at least 6 months, which could mean that the game may not meet its original release date, if it was in fact supposed to release this year. With all that said, I want to touch on some areas I feel are incredibly important for 16 to get right. These are things which 15 struggled with, and I hope the team behind 16 can address them in the new game. For starters, Final Fantasy XVI needs to launch as a complete experience. One of the worst things that plagued 15 was the entire multimedia project. Though an exciting prospect at first, this was soon discovered to be a rough attempt to fit in huge chunks of lore and backstory that couldn't make it into the final game. This meant key story segments were cut out and used as a movie or anime series. Not to mention the DLC being used as a way to fix missing content from the main campaign. 16 needs to deliver a good story that stands on its own without needing support from other media. A big problem which plagued Final Fantasy XV in my opinion was a lack of organization. This stems from the rocky and disjointed direction 15 endured due to changing hands between dev teams. Though the original game had a vision and game design headed up by Tetsuya Nomura, the final product was made by many people who were not involved with the original concept. Thus, the Frankenstein amalgamation of conflicting visions reduced that game to less than it could have been. One of the major things that 16 has going for it is that the game has been managed by the same team under Yoshi P's guidance since its inception, so the chances of it repeating the same mistake from 15 are likely small. Another big issue I had with 15 was the way the game handled its supporting cast of characters, or more appropriately, how it didn't take care of them. I hope sincerely that 16 won't introduce cool and interesting characters, but give them little to no development in the same way 15 gave its cast hardly any material inside the main game. And while we're touching on aspects of the story, 15 had, as I've said in other videos, a pacing problem with its main narrative. 16 needs to learn from that. Many people complain about the last third of Final Fantasy XV being some kind of on-the-rails experience, no pun intended, that moves the plot along at lightning speed, especially when compared to the first parts of the game. If we can get a story that allows us time to immerse ourselves into the world and get to know the characters through meaningful quests and missions, then by the time the credits roll in 16, I'm sure we will all have better experiences than we did in 15. Now, with the gameplay, 16 needs to fully commit to a design philosophy. By that I mean it needs to focus on going for either a full open world or a more linear experience, not both at the same time. Most games that try to mix linear and full open world design struggle to have depth in either category, although on a rare occasion a game can make it work. Square and other companies need to start realizing that if a game doesn't need an open world, it's better to focus on game content and depth rather than surface level design choices. Linear games with depth are far better than open world games littered with nothing but fetch quests. With side quests, Final Fantasy XV had a lot of them, but they really felt shallow, more like random filler. I understand that not every game can have tons of handcrafted quest missions to supplement the main story, but the offering of rich side content in 15's world was nearly non-existent. I'm hoping that 16 can bring some of the spark that has made Final Fantasy XIV such a success and inject it into the game world. Traditionally, I feel like if RPG games give me side content that has value on its own, the game always feels stronger. I'm trusting the Final Fantasy XVI devs to appreciate that fetch quests don't constitute gripping content. This is why, both in this video and around YouTube, you'll see so many people talk about depth and rich content in RPGs, because it's come to the point where we feel we have to remind game developers that the bar for engaging game content is not set by Ubisoft. So, we can only hope that Final Fantasy XVI tries to break new ground and to some extent set a new standard for what a Final Fantasy title should be. Final Fantasy XV was something I think Square hoped would do this, but the way they went about it just didn't pan out. One particular piece of 15 content that caused a controversy was the inclusion of dungeons as main mission areas in the campaign. Final Fantasy XVI would do well to avoid this trap that 15 fell into. I'm not against dungeons being in a game. I mean, I love playing through them, but I like when games delineate between set-piece missions and dungeons. I think if 16 has side dungeons as additional content, but keeps the main story separated into specifically designed mission areas, most of 15's problems can be avoided. The last issue with 15 isn't necessarily a bad thing inherently, it really comes down to subjectivity, and the length of a campaign doesn't define whether or not it's good. But with this franchise, there are expectations to consider. Final Fantasy XV comes in at just over 25 hours. This is a significantly shorter story for a main Final Fantasy game. I hope that 16 will be more in line with the traditional Final Fantasy stories in its scope and scale. But whatever, we'll see what happens. So guys, these are the things I'm most worried about with Final Fantasy XVI. But hey, let me know what your worries and concerns are in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you all have to say. As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please like, share, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell for notifications, so you won't miss out on any new videos as soon as they drop. Thank you all so much, and have yourself a great day.